everyone, welcome back to Alpha Art Gallery's Meet the Artist series. My name is Ibel Sham and I'm here with Rosalind Nzinga, who is an exhibiting artist for the New Brunswick Art Salon Oil and Mixed Media exhibition. Hi Rosalind, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you today?
Absolutely wonderful. So let's just jump straight into the questions. You describe yourself as a storyteller in your art. Could you elaborate on the narratives you aim to convey for your mixed media works and what inspires these stories?
Yes, my story that I'm really trying to convey is history. I'm really all about telling history, retelling history, trying to correct history. I am African American, and I think the complexities of growing up in this country and how sometimes our history has been uh, not told properly. Um, and I grew up in West where we didn't have any kind of like studies or African American study programs. So when I moved west and started living in other parts of the country and really learning about African history and African American history, it became really important to me to include history in my work. And eventually I began to teach African American traditions. And so we had thousands of years of history before we came to America and cultures. And it just became important to me to somehow retell and tell the story of African African American culture
Yeah,
and
that's
history.
I absolutely agree. I think it's very important to like educate people on like our culture, for example. Like it's very hard for people to just like come into these kind of knowledge. So I think it's very important for artists in general to just share their background and educate people on those. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So the next question would be, your artistic journey has spanned from graphic design to paper-mâché sculptures, and now onto mixed media quilts, painting, and installations. What prompted this evolution in your creative process, and how have these different mediums allowed you to develop your distinct aesthetic?
Well, I think, I was trying to think about that question. I think I've always been curious. My grandmother was a very creative woman. She was really a crafter, a cook. She had so many different talents, and we always explored a lot of stuff when I was young. So I started painting like by the time I was 7, and so I was always doing fine art. But I made a critical decision when I went to work that graphic design would somehow pay me more money. Anyway, so I became a graphic artist, but fine art kept pulling on me, and so after 20 years, I went back into fine art. But the good thing about graphic design is that it really gave me some technical skills and disciplines that maybe I wouldn't have had in fine art. And then it introduced me to the love of paper because I was doing set designs and cosmetic display and other display works. I used a lot of paper and wire and things when I was creating displays, and I really started falling in love with paper. And as far as textiles, I think, that was always a part of that process I had with my grandmother. She sewed, crocheted, knitted, and she did so many different handcrafts that um, I just have always, and not only her, but my family seem to be people that work with their hands a lot. And so I really have always been curious. And somehow or another, I just feel the richness when I blend it all together. I like, mixed media work. I do paint, I do love watercolor, but mixed media seems to be the thing that I really thrive on.
That's beautiful to hear. I'm also a painter right now. I'm studying at Pratt Institute as a painting major. Um,
Oh,
zero
wonderful.
background. Yeah, I was zero background in graphic design, so I'm like curious about like how that really influences your work and how like intertwines with fine art. Because I believe it may have an influence on your compositions, because I've seen like some of your works and like they're arranged so beautifully and kind of and like almost in a graphic sense in a way. So
Yeah.
wondering
Yeah.
if there's like some kind of like thought process going on whenever you make a work.
I don't know. I have a friend who is, I don't know if you know the artist Willie Cole, but he is a very well-known artist in America now. But his roommate and I are really good. His old roommate from when they were younger and are real good friends. And we've had many talks about this. We all started off with this graphic background. And the gentleman I'm talking about, he's actually a photographer. But I think I look at Willie's work and I do see that influence of the graphic design. And now that you say that, and just as you were saying, I was thinking about my work, and I do think space, because, you know, in graphic design, you're always thinking about designing space. It's all about space relationships. And I think when I'm doing my work, I'm probably subconsciously, because I work so long as a designer and an art director, I think those things are just inside of me, and I probably do them unconsciously, probably.
That's amazing to hear. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we talked about your grandmother a little bit just now, but like your artist statement mentioned a strong influence from your grandmother Esther's appreciation for repurposing textiles and found objects. So how does this family heritage shape the materials and techniques you utilize in your art practice?
Yeah, she used to amaze me. I think she was a child of the Depression. She was also a woman that had something mysterious happen to her in her 20s where she lost the ability to walk. So she became disabled and she had to teach herself to walk again. And so I think she really valued about, holding on to things and using all her resources. So when something in our house was like maybe worn out, I would watch her disassemble a blouse, and she would take all the buttons off and take all the seams off, and she could take the thread off and have it come off in one long single piece and wrap it around, not even broken. And you see that fabric pop up somewhere else, and I think that idea of repurposing, it came from her, and it's been in me. I know some people, even with my paper, I wear a lot of linen, but when it gets threadbare, there's a Japanese process where they sew over and over again on I can't think of that name, but
Oh,
I do my clothes like that. And then when they get beyond that, then I churn them up and make paper out of them. So it's really hard for me to let go. And so I think I really got that from her, because she was just really thrifty and thriftful. And so we had this amazing creative time together, even though, I didn't realize our resources were limited, because she always found things for us to work with and to create, together with.
oh, okay. So I'm curious because you mentioned that a lot of the items were thrifted, but I was wondering if your grandma or you perhaps use any of like cultural related like clothing or even just like paper related things. Because in Chinese culture, we have these things called like red pockets, and we have like very like elegant Chinese designs on them, or like for example, our Chinese traditional clothing. I know some artists like repurpose clothes and like make new artworks. I was wondering if you do something similar too.
Well, once I got a chance to start learning a lot about African traditions, and I taught a class as an adjunct professor on African traditions and weaving. And so then I've always been drawn to textures. And of course, as a paper maker, disintegrating lace really blends into paper making well. But then the different kind of fabrics and textiles that are coming from different regions of Africa, those things became important to me. And I just really appreciate the symbolism. And I do, even if I don't use the textiles themselves, sometimes you're right, I may just incorporate the design. But to me, that's also a part of telling the story that we were a people that were brought to America with thousands of years of history, and we just had that history interrupted when we came to this country. For so long we were told that we just came here these empty vessels, and Europe, people of Eurocentric background poured culture into us. It's like, no, lost wax, a method of metalwork that's 3,000 years old. I mean, textile weaving, we brought so many crafts and skills to this country. And I think as I began to understand, the longevity of craft, in African traditions, in answer to your question, I don't know if I don't, I mean, there's so many things I could probably say about the Kuba cloth or mud cloth, or I'm really love beading, but I I don't particularly focus in on any particular aspect of maybe African traditions, but I do have like bins of textiles and and beads and things people give me or things I've collected. And I just put those things in front of me. And so it may
Oh,
be my own little interpretation, but I'm incorporating these things, but as I feel them. I have the great luxury of having a friend that's a seamstress. Her son travels a lot internationally, and she's been a weaver and a textile artist. And so Christmas morning to me is going over to her house and going through her scrap bins because I get textiles from all over the world. And so I like the hodgepodge of mixing them all up because I see the beauty, in that. So I don't know if I necessarily stay true to, even though I think we're all interconnected anyway, we all share, nobody creates in a vacuum. So I don't know if I think about it consciously. I'm much more intuitive artist. I just do what I feel. Once I get started, it just seems like the work is I follow the work. I don't lead it, I kind of follow where it's going. It's like it's ready to be made and it's just like leading me where it wants to go.
that sounds super interesting. Like I also in a way relate to that a lot. And also yeah, I think you're just like paying homage to your culture initially. And also like just like revitalizing your culture.
Yes, that's a good word. I like that word,
Yeah.
revitalizing it, because
Mhm.
I want people to be interested not only in the culture, but just I just in the richness of
Mhm.
the fabric of what makes our country and what makes people richer is the inclusion
Mhm.
of it's like eating a feast. If you just ate one thing, you wouldn't really be that sad. But the richness of the layering of how you bring it in, that's how I see my work, too.
Mhm.
It's the richness of it all and putting it together.
Mhm. That sounds amazing. So yeah, I mean, we kind of like
I
leaned into
know we kind
spread.
of went over
Yeah.
our, yeah, that's
Mhm.
okay.
I will just ask anyway, since you work extensively with handmade paper, vintage lace, and textiles, what is it about these mediums that appeal to you, and how do you see them as vehicles for expressing the lyrical and spiritual qualities that you strive for?
Well, I painted for a long time, and I did paper mache sculpture because I when I went to college, I put myself through school doing murals. And so there was an opportunity to incorporate paper mache into that because I had images that were coming off the wall. And so for a long time, I was really absorbed in that paper mache, paper. And then I had a really kind of a rough patch in my life in relationship to some personal relationships, and a friend invited me. Well, before that happened, I started teaching myself paper making. I mean, my paper was horrible, but I just had the sense. So a friend of mine invited me to upstate New York to a paper making workshop. And as soon as I stuck my hand in the water, I just realized that was it for me. There's something so healing. It's an organic process. Anybody can do it, but for me, paper making really gave me this place to rejuvenate and to revive myself. And I often teach paper making to people who have never done art before. I used to take people upstate with me once a year to New York, and I don't care what their experience has been, they immediately gravitate to how cathartic that experience is, to the point that just last year I did a paper making workshop for caregivers in the hospital, nurses, and actually a couple of doctors joined in.
Nice.
And it's such a healing process. And so that deepened that love for me. And so in a way, everything now kind of revolves around handmade paper. I always try to include it, even if I'm doing painting, or I have some quilts that are cloth and handmade paper. I mean, I really mix the mediums up. So if I can figure out a way to hold it together, to answer your question, it's just whatever that work is speaking to me to be.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I think um, I really want people to experience the joy of who they are on the inside. And who we are spiritually is so much more important than what we wear on the outside. And
Mhm.
I've had that experience. They've been great healing experiences for me. And I think in my work, I'm always wanting people to have some kind of spiritual sense of my work. And I think the best compliment I ever got was from a lady who bought a piece of my work. She said, it's not that I can tell you what it does, but I look at your work and I just feel it. And to me, that's a good compliment, that it is touching them internally. We don't always have words to articulate things. The wind blows, we don't see it. We can't, measure it, but we feel the experience of it. And that's how I feel about my work. If it touches you, if it says something to you, I think one of your questions was about the spiritual quality. How do I see the spiritual quality of my work? And I think that that's a part of what I want my work to do. I want it to touch people. It's organic. The way I go about it is organic. And so I like to, that's why my abstracted narratives, I'm always telling stories, but sometimes they're abstracted because even though I may be talking about my African American traditions, I want you to be able to come to the work and have your experience. So I never make the narrative so literal that there's not room for someone to have their own experience with the work.
Right. You just like want people to like resonate with your work and just like
Yeah.
try to find meaning and stuff. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
that was one of the questions again, like how you describe your work as intentionally vague for viewers to just like derive their own meanings. I really do appreciate like how you went into detail about like why you wanted to do this and like how it made people feel. Okay, so
Yeah.
now I'm just like curious about like have you heard what viewers generally say about your works? Do you usually get opinions from others about your work, or you're just kind of going with the flow and see how they react to it?
Well, I realized that I can trust myself. I had this piece of work I did maybe 8 years ago. I don't know, but it ended up in the exhibit a couple years ago. Nobody bought it. People didn't seem to pay attention to it at the show. I guess I didn't think it was very successful. But the hospital where I did the workshop, the director of nursing turned the corner. She looked at that piece and grabbed her chest, and tears started coming out of her eyes. And she said, "This piece reminds me so much of," I can't remember exactly what, but I think I had an epiphany that day that when we create, we just have to trust the process in us because we're creating for somebody. That it may not be for somebody today, it may be something for down the road. I do find the one thing that people say a lot about my work is that it's hard to read it online.
Mhm.
Someone bought a piece of work last year. They said, I looked at it online, didn't touch me at all, but when I saw it in person. And I think the texture of it, the textile of it, I hear that over and over again. Said your work online doesn't do it justice. You really have to experience it in person. So that's the one thing I'm always struggling with because that has been good feedback to me. And I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. It's just that it's not flat. It needs that dimensionality for people to really experience the work in person. So I did a video the other day of a new series of work I'm working on. And I think just doing the video and talking about the work, because all my work is pretty much narrative based, even if it's abstracted. And the one woman said, I love the piece at the show where it is, but when you explained it, the meaning is so much deeper. So I like interacting with people. I think I'm a people person. I like people, and I like to know that they're, um, really experiencing my work. I don't. I create. I think I try to create work that's meaningful, and I wait for work to. I don't. I may not be as prolific as some people because I have to get the work in my heart before I start it. And then I get some feeling or some idea or something's bothering me about news or people or culture, then that might be the impetus for the work. But I'm usually following the work. I
Mhm.
rarely. lead the work.
Right.
So yes, I do get a lot of input from people when, when they tell me, but my biggest thing, if I could figure out a way to accomplish, is that I hear, if I had $1 for every time somebody said I might be a wealthy, because people say your work is so different in person, always.
That's so interesting to hear. I wish I could see it in person, but yeah, I think I can come to the opening night. I really want to see.
Oh, I hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so.
I mean, I kind of see your work at the back as the butterfly, like 3D protruding. Is that
Yes, it is. That's actually a handmade butterfly.
Mhm.
And I did a piece when my mother passed away about the day it rained butterflies, because whenever you lose someone in your circle, the dynamics of that circle changes. So I did this piece and I cut out of my handmade paper hundreds of butterflies, which attached onto this garment, then hung about four stories deep in this gallery that I've exhibited at here in New Jersey. And so then after that exhibit, I just had these hundreds of butterflies. But I like the idea of metamorphosis. It was a great symbol for my mother. And I was a hospice chaplain for a number of years. And I don't know, there's something very meaningful to me about the butterfly. It does show up a lot in my work. And this particular work, which is going to be a part of the show, which I'm happy to say, I got to thinking about, and this again is the complexity of the roots of being African American, and also knowing that I'm have English and Irish extraction and very strong Native American extraction in my family. I just started thinking about all of these people on the shoulders I stand, and it became important to me to show the diversity of people. So a lot of the people that are holding up the garment are people with their heads split in half. Half of them are lighter extraction, half of them are browner extractions, and it's really about the diversity of how we got here. And so that butterfly, there's actually a little tiny mirror right
Beautiful.
there. It's a little tiny mirror, and you actually have room to look in there and see yourself
Ooh.
in the piece. So I do hope you'll be able to come and see it up close, because I mean, and the piece is called These Shoulders Here, because I always think about, none of us got here by ourselves.
Right, yeah.
We're all standing on shoulders of the people that came before us, who worked. You're in school now, and I'm sure your generations of your family, you know that you didn't get to where you are by yourself. And
For
that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's well, I really hope I can come. I'm pretty sure I will. And I hope I can see you then in person actually. So yeah.
Well, I hope so well
Mhm.
as well.
So yeah, now you highlight the complexities of your American and African's root as a source of inspiration. Could you delve into how you specifically incorporate iconography and also textiles from the African diaspora to explore the themes of identity and cultural heritage?
Yes, well, I use, textile to me has the DNA of everybody that's ever touched it. And
Mm.
so when I think about using textiles, I'm thinking that I'm working with history, with the history of the people that made it. And, if it's African textiles, and I'm working with those generations, I'm bringing those generations into my now. And then when I'm touching it with my hands, I'm adding my DNA in there. So textile has history to me. And I think African, some of the geometric forms and shapes and colors, these are designs and patterns that are hundreds of thousands of years old. And I saw a video a couple of months on Instagram where they were showing all these contemporary designers that people are paying lots of money for their work. And then they just cross-reference them to the African graphic designs and forms that they came from. And so I think that, there's nothing new under the sun. And you would look at, I won't name the designers, but you could look at some of this stuff and think it's so new and fresh when actually they're hundreds of years old. So I like that graphic quality. I mean, we all know Picasso, went to Africa. He got very inspired by the geometric shapes and forms, and it sparked a whole new movement in him. So to me, all at once, African forms are traditional, but they're modern and contemporary. And I also vibe off of the simplicity of it all. I'm trying to sometimes reduce things to their simplest forms to see. I know you asked a question about why I use the body parts, because sometimes I use the body parts as graphic symbols in my work. And that has something to do with how we came to this country as slaves. Our body parts were the important things, they were commodities. But there's something strong in the human form. And so I'm still exploring that whole thing of using the human form as actually graphic elements. And I think those things are directly related to how I relate to African sculpture and graphic design, because I think it's beautiful. I'm looking at this piece behind me of this figure, but anyway, I'm using the body. I'm not finished with that whole black and white series of using the body as a form, as a graphic form. And I've been working on this series called Collective Memory, because as we've been talking, none of us are here by ourselves. And one day I had this epiphany that, we are the generations that came before us. And I have this piece called So Great a Cloud of Witnesses, where there are people inside of people inside of people, because all of those people are inside of you. So inside of one form are all these multiple people, because we're not just ourselves, we're all the generations, who came before us.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought it was very symbolic for you to use human figures because we ourselves we're history. We're made of like generations and generations of people, and like that hearing from what you said earlier, it really like blends in with your work really well and like what you're trying to say in your work.
Thank you. I like what you said. We're history. I like that. That's the best way. We're living history, and
Yeah.
the form is so beautiful. And nowadays I think it's funny. When I was in art school, we painted nudes, and we got to discover the human form. And now people have such. I didn't know it was such a big issue. Now people's like, oh, you're painting naked people. It's like, well, how else are you going to learn the human form if you're not uh, you know, drawing it? I said, I don't think artists don't think about it in the same way. I'm just trying to figure out where all the muscles and tendons and the bones go. I just want to see it. Even if I abstract it, I just want to understand how it is.
I so completely agree with what you said because like I also paint like a lot of new people that I paint like very feminist work in that way, but not painting nudity in terms of a sexual way like a lot of people
Yes.
think, but in more like an artistic way and like how old master painters always used the nude to like, fulfill their like sexual fantasies or whatever. But for us women, I feel like we're trying to use the nude in a way to like convey that we're all just essentially human beings. That nothing else. So completely agree with what you're saying. And
Yeah, and I think a lot of those old masters, they were trying to learn. They didn't have cameras, and they had to, I mean, some of them went as far as dissecting bodies. How are we're learning, we are the beneficiaries of all the people that took the time to study, the human forms, to create anatomy books and to take the things apart, because before then people, you know, just they didn't necessarily, even if you don't draw it perfectly, to understand what you're drawing, that makes a difference. And um
yeah, this makes me think that like artists in general is like I feel like should be one of the more important people in this entire planet because without us, people wouldn't understand like the human body. If there's no artist drawing like human bodies and just like bones, skeletal structure, organs, we wouldn't have this understanding because they didn't have the technology to do like 3D modeling or scans. So yeah.
Yes, and you know, we're always ahead of society, and I encourage artists, you know, even if people don't get your work now, I think about Van Gogh. You know, he thought he died a failure because, you know, he was so far ahead of people that people didn't get his work too long after he was gone. Now it sells for millions of dollars. So we're always going to be ahead of the curve, and so I think I encourage myself. I think we have to encourage ourselves that even if people don't see your vision of what you're doing, you still have to. You still have to do it because it is for an appointed time, even if that time hasn't come.
Great. So yeah, I feel like we tackled most of the questions already for our conversation. So I want to ask if there's anything else you want to add or talk about that we haven't touched on already.
I think I don't know if we went in order. I took the questions, I thought about them,
You kind of
but
went
I
in
think
order, actually. Yeah, that's why I'm just like, wait, I don't need to ask that anymore. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's an organic flow because I feel very strongly about the narrative part of my work. And so I do, even though a lot of times they're not the most, you know, they're not recognizable symbols, but I am thinking really intentionally about the work. And there's that strong factor of history and spiritual. And
Mhm.
I think if I had to boil my work down to that, it's about, you know, telling the history and also opening up the spiritual. Because I have this, they say it's an African proverb, but I think it's just an ancient proverb. It says, if you don't know if you don't know where you're going, at least know where you come from.
Hmm.
And you know, we're all a product of history, and we're still making it every day. So I just think history is important to life and to how we think about where we're going. If we don't think about where we come from, how in the world are we going to make paths forward? So I think artists and creativity is important. Creativity is important to the human existence. And I'm really sorry that it's not in schools as much as it is. They know that there is a relationship between hand and eye coordination. It helps to stimulate the brain. And I think in some way, everybody has creativity in them. It's just letting them be free enough to figure out what that is. I think we'd have less wars and a much better place if creativity was somehow taught more in the educational system. So I think those are my big heart passion things. Those are the things that really, you know, mean the most to me about my work. Other than when I do work, you know, it brings me peace and joy and it helps me to grow because I learn from my work as I'm doing it, you know.
Mhm.
So
For sure.
but I want to say thank you so much for the gallery. I'm looking forward to the show. I'm not sure how I got included in the show, but I'm really happy and I'm looking forward to being in the exhibition.
You're very welcome. We're really glad we picked you as well. We looked through your work and we're like, wow, this is like amazing. We love that swirl pattern in the background. We love like the way you just it's a very graphic style of work that's also very fine artsy in a way. So that's why that got kind of like captivated
Mm.
in a way. So we really look forward to seeing you in our gallery as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know where the swirl came from. It's just lyrical. I think one person told me I sing when I talk. I think I'm just a
Oh.
lyrical person, and and so the swirl. I look back at my work for years and years, and I can. It's always moving. It's always in swirls and circles. So you know, just
Like
a part of
history
what
keeps on going. That's probably
history keeps going.
yeah.
That's good. I like that.
Mhm.
History keeps going. Yeah.
Yeah, so well, Rosalind, thank you so much for being here with us today. We can't wait to see your work at our exhibition titled Color and Texture and Typologies of Artistry, which will be on view from August 27th to October 19th, 2024. So thank you again and have a great rest of your day.